The night of the moon-claiming ceremony arrived like a storm rolling slowly across the mountains. From the earliest hours of dusk, the entire pack felt it. A strange energy. A tension woven through the forest like invisible threads. Even the wolves running through the distant hills seemed restless, their howls echoing across the valley as the full moon began its slow climb into the sky. Tonight was not simply tradition. Tonight was destiny. And destiny had gathered witnesses. Torches were planted in wide circles around the ceremonial clearing, their flames swaying in the cool night wind. The firelight painted long shadows across the ancient stone altar that rested beneath the sacred oak tree, an enormous tree older than the pack itself. Drums began to echo softly through the clearing. Rhythmic, ancient. Each beat seemed to pulse through the ground itself. One by one, wolves emerged from the forest paths, filling the clearing. Warriors stood near the front, their cloaks draped over broad shoulders. Hunters gathered behind them. Healers, elders, families, all of them waiting. Because tonight, their alpha would choose his mate. And every wolf in the territory had already formed their own prediction. Some whispered Serena's name confidently. Others exchanged curious glances toward the edge of the clearing where a quiet figure stood alone. Alara. She had arrived early, not because she wanted to be seen, but because leaving would have felt like running. And she had spent her entire life refusing to run. The firelight flickered across her face as she stood beneath the shadows of the sacred oak. Her hands were folded quietly in front of her. Her breathing slow, controlled. But inside her chest, her heart beat far faster than the drums. Because tonight, everything would finally be decided. The wind shifted, and then, the drums stopped. A heavy silence fell over the clearing. From the stone steps leading down from the Alpha's lodge, a figure appeared. Alpha Rowan. The moment he stepped into the torchlight, the entire pack straightened. Rowan looked every inch the Alpha tonight. Tall. Commanding. His dark cloak flowed behind him as he descended toward the ceremonial circle. Golden eyes swept across the gathered wolves. Strong. Confident. Unshaken. At least, that was the image he projected. But those who knew Rowan closely might have noticed the tension in his jaw. The slight hesitation in his step. Because beneath the surface of that calm exterior, a war still raged inside him. His wolf paced restlessly beneath his skin. The bond inside his chest pulled violently toward one direction. Toward one person. But pride and fear pulled him another way. Rowan reached the center of the sacred circle. The drums resumed briefly. 3 deep beats. Then silence again. From the Elder Council, Elder Marek stepped forward. His long gray hair shifted in the wind as he raised his ceremonial staff. The clearing held its breath. Tonight, the Elder announced, his voice echoing across the clearing, we gather beneath the full moon to witness the sacred bond of the Alpha. The crowd stood perfectly still. The Alpha's mate will stand beside him. His gaze swept across the wolves. She will lead the pack. His voice deepened. She will carry the strength of our future. Pause. Then the Elder turned to Rowan. Alpha Rowan. The words rang like a bell. Claim your mate. The moment had arrived. The entire pack leaned forward. 2 figures stepped into the circle. Serena moved first. Graceful. Confident. Her dark hair shimmered under the torchlight, and her expression was calm, almost regal. She already looked like a Luna. Like she had been born for this moment. Then, Alara stepped forward. The difference between them was impossible to ignore. Serena stood tall, shoulders back, eyes shining with certainty. Alara stood quietly. No arrogance. No pride. Just quiet strength. The pack began whispering immediately. Some voices carried clearly through the crowd. Why is she even here? She actually thought he would choose her? She can't even shift. The whispers grew louder. Serena's lips curved faintly. Rowan looked at the 2 women standing before him. And for a moment, the entire world seemed to narrow into silence. His gaze moved first to Serena. Power. Ambition. A mate the pack would respect. Then his eyes drifted slowly toward Alara. And something inside his chest tightened painfully. Because despite everything, his wolf knew the truth. The bond between them flared suddenly. Strong. Demanding. The urge to step forward. To claim her. To end the tension once and for all. Rose violently inside him. Alara felt it too. Her breath caught. For a split second. Hope flickered in her eyes. Because the way Rowan was looking at her felt different. Stronger. As if the decision had already been made. Around them the crowd leaned closer. Even Serena felt the shift. Her fingers tightened slightly around Rowan's arm. A small movement, barely noticeable, but deliberate. Her nails pressed gently into his sleeve, a silent reminder. Her voice slipped into his ear, too quiet for anyone else to hear. If you claim that weak girl. Her breath brushed his skin. Every alpha will laugh at you. The words struck deep. Rowan's jaw tightened. His wolf growled inside him. But his pride, his fear, his reputation, all surged forward at once. Slowly, his gaze moved away from Alara. Hope died quietly in her chest. Rowan turned toward the crowd. His voice rang across the clearing. Clear, strong, unwavering. I reject you, Alara. For one heartbeat. No one moved. The words seemed too heavy to process. Then, gasps exploded through the crowd. A ripple of shock swept across the clearing like wildfire. Some wolves stared in disbelief. Others exchanged stunned glances, because rejecting a fated mate, especially publicly, was almost unheard of. Then the whispers began, and within seconds, they turned into laughter. Cruel, sure, unforgiving. Well, that was predictable. I told you he wouldn't choose her. The weak wolf thought she would become Luna. More laughter followed. Some wolves didn't laugh. A few looked uncomfortable. Others looked away. But most simply enjoyed the spectacle. At the center of the circle, Alara didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her face pale beneath the torchlight. The rejection struck like a blade sliding directly through her chest. Because rejecting a fated mate didn't just end a bond. It tore it apart. The connection inside her soul snapped violently. Pain exploded through her body. Her breath hitched as something invisible shattered deep inside her. For a moment, she thought she might collapse. But she didn't. She forced herself to remain standing, because the entire pack was watching, and she refused to fall in front of them. Across from her, Serena stepped forward slowly. Her smile was radiant, victorious, as if everything had unfolded exactly as she planned. She slipped her arm through Rowan's, claiming her place beside him without hesitation. The image was perfect. Alpha and Luna. Strength and power. Exactly what the pack expected. The crowd began cheering now. Rowan had made the right choice. The strong choice. The proud choice. But Rowan didn't join the celebration. His wolf roared in agony inside his chest. Because the moment he rejected Alara, the bond had snapped violently on his side as well. The pain burned through him like wildfire. But Rowan forced himself to remain still. Because an alpha never showed weakness. Across the circle, Alara finally lowered her gaze. The laughter around her felt distant, muted, like echoes underwater. Her chest still burned from the shattered bond. But something else stirred beneath that pain. Something unfamiliar. Something ancient. The air shifted suddenly. The wind changed direction. And slowly, the laughter began to fade. Because a new presence had entered the clearing. At first only a few wolves noticed. Then more heads turned. Conversations died. The drums fell silent. A heavy stillness spread across the crowd. From the far edge of the torchlight, a tall figure stepped forward. Dark silver cloak. Cold silver eyes. Power radiating from him like a living storm. Every wolf in the clearing instantly recognized him. Even Rowan's breath caught. Because there was only one man in all the territories whose presence alone could silence an entire pack. The ruler of them all. Alpha King Kale. He walked slowly into the clearing, each step calm, deliberate. And with every step, the weight of his authority pressed heavier against the crowd. No one spoke. No one moved. Because when the Alpha King appeared without warning, it meant only one thing. Something important had just changed. Kale's silver gaze swept across the clearing. Across the cheering warriors. Across Serena's triumphant smile. Across Rowan's tense expression. And finally, his eyes settled on Alara, still standing alone in the center of the circle. Humiliated. Broken. Rejected. For a long moment, the Alpha King simply watched her, as if confirming something. Then the faintest smile touched the corner of his mouth, and suddenly, the night felt far from over. Night pressed heavily against the windows of the small, aging house at the edge of the territory. Not the kind of night that felt peaceful. The kind that watched. The kind that remembered. Inside, silence lingered like something alive. Unforgiving. Unkind. Alara sat near the narrow wooden table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her fingers trembling just enough to betray what she refused to show on her face. The room was dim. Only a single lantern flickered, casting shadows that stretched long across the walls. Shadows that made everything feel smaller. Colder. Lonelier. She had learned to exist quietly in this space, to take up as little room as possible, to breathe without being noticed, because in this house, her presence was no longer welcome. Not truly. Not anymore. A floorboard creaked behind her. Heavy footsteps followed. Measured. Sure. Her father. Elara didn't turn. She didn't need to. She could feel him the same way prey feels a predator long before it strikes. You're still sitting there? His voice cut through the silence like a blade. Cold. Flat. Without warmth. Elara swallowed softly. Yes, father. Pause. Then a scoff. Disgust barely hidden. You should be preparing. Her fingers tightened slightly. I will. Another step closer. You will, he repeated, voice low with irritation. Because whether you like it or not, you are going. Elara closed her eyes briefly. Going. As if she had a choice. As if anything in her life still belonged to her. Her father moved past her, stopping near the window. You've already brought enough shame to this family, he said, staring into the dark. You will not refuse this opportunity as well. Opportunity. The word felt wrong. Twisted. Like something broken pretending to be whole. Elara finally turned her head slightly. The royal selection, she whispered. Her father's jaw tightened. Yes. Silence stretched between them. Heavy. Unspoken things filled the space. Then, you will attend, he continued, and you will stand among the others. His voice hardened. And perhaps, someone will be willing to take you. Take you. Not choose. Not love. Not accept. It. Like a burden. Like a mistake someone might reluctantly carry. Elara's hand moved unconsciously to her abdomen. Small. Barely visible. But real. So painfully real. Her father noticed. His gaze dropped. For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Not concern. Not regret. Just irritation. Stop that, he snapped. Elara's hand froze. You will not draw attention to it, he said sharply. Do you understand? Her throat tightened. Yes, father. He exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face as if trying to rid himself of a problem he could not solve. You've made this difficult enough, he muttered. No one wants a ruined Omega. The word landed heavily. Ruined. It followed her everywhere now. In whispers. In stares. In the way people avoided standing too close to her. As if whatever had happened to her might somehow spread. Elara lowered her gaze. Because part of her almost believed them. That something inside her had been broken. That something about her was wrong. Even if she didn't understand why. Even if she couldn't remember how it had happened. Her mind drifted. Back to that night. Fragments. Always fragments. Music. Laughter. A gathering she hadn't wanted to attend. A drink pressed into her hand. Sweet. Too sweet. Then. Blurred faces. Voices she couldn't quite recognize. A room that felt unfamiliar. Her body heavy. Unresponsive. Fear rising slowly, like something crawling beneath her skin. Stop. She remembered whispering it. Or maybe she only thought she had. A shadow moving closer. A presence. Strong. Overwhelming. Then darkness. When she woke, everything had already changed. The memory always ended there. Broken. Incomplete. And no matter how hard she tried, she could never see the face. Never hear the voice clearly. Never understand what had really happened. Only the aftermath remained. The whispers. The judgment. The quiet shift in how the world saw her. And now, this. Her father turned back toward her. You will leave at dawn, he said firmly. Elara nodded faintly. He studied her for a moment, as if weighing something. Then his voice dropped, colder than before. This is your only chance to fix what you've done. Fix. As if she had chosen this. As if she had wanted any of it. If no one chooses you, he continued slowly, then you will not return here. The words hung in the air. Sure. Final. Elara's breath caught slightly. Not return. There was no anger in his voice. No threat. Just certainty. A door closing. Her chest tightened. But she didn't argue. Didn't plead. Because deep down, she already knew. She had nowhere else to go. Morning came too quickly. The sky was pale, washed in cold light as the carriage arrived outside the house. Elara stepped out slowly, her small bag clutched in her hands. The air felt different. Heavier. As if the world itself was holding its breath. Her father stood behind her. Silent. Waiting. Remember, he said at last, his voice low, stand straight. She nodded. Do not speak unless spoken to. Another nod. And do not embarrass me further. That one hurt more than the rest. But she swallowed it. Like she always did. The carriage door opened. Elara hesitated for just a second. Then she stepped inside. The door closed behind her. And just like that, her old life was gone. The journey to the palace felt longer than it should have. The wheels of the carriage creaked softly against the stone road as towering walls slowly came into view. The royal palace. Massive. Imposing. Beautiful in a way that felt untouchable. Like something built for people who had never known shame. Elara's chest tightened as the gates opened. Inside, the courtyard buzzed with life. Carriages lined the entrance. Servants moved quickly. And everywhere, women. Dozens of them. All dressed in fine fabrics. Silk, velvet, gold thread embroidery that shimmered in the sunlight. They laughed, whispered, stood in confident clusters. Each one more radiant than the last. Each one here for the same reason. To be chosen. Elara stepped down from the carriage slowly. And immediately, the noise shifted. Not completely, but enough. Eyes turned toward her. Curious, then recognizing. Whispers began. Soft at first, then sharper. Is that her? The one they were talking about? She actually came? Elara felt it all. Every stare. Every judgment. Her hands tightened around her bag as she walked forward. Trying to stay invisible. Trying to disappear. But there was nowhere to hide. Not here. Not now. Because this was not just a gathering. This was a selection. And she was already disqualified. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. A servant approached, guiding her toward the grand entrance hall. Follow me, he said politely. Elara nodded. Her steps echoed against the polished marble floors as she entered the palace. The ceiling stretched high above her, painted with scenes of past kings and queens. Power. Legacy. Perfection. Everything she was not. She moved deeper into the hall. Further into the unknown. Her heart beat faster with every step. Because somewhere in this palace, her future was waiting. And she already knew what it would look like. Rejection. Humiliation. Final judgment. But as she crossed the threshold into the grand selection chamber, something shifted. Subtle. Almost invisible. A presence. Watching. Waiting. Unseen. Elara paused for just a moment. Her breath catching. A strange feeling brushed against her senses. Not cruel. Not mocking. Different. As if someone had already noticed her. She didn't understand it. Couldn't explain it. So she kept walking. Deeper into the room. Deeper into her fate. Unaware that somewhere above, hidden behind shadowed balconies and silent guards, a pair of eyes had already found her. Already chosen her. Already claimed something she didn't even know she possessed. Elara walked into the palace believing she would be rejected. Believing this night would be the end of whatever remained of her life. But fate had already made its decision. And it was not asking for her permission. The palace did not sleep. It watched. Every corridor, every polished surface, every flicker of candlelight reflected a world built on power and perfection. A world where weakness was not hidden. It was erased. And tonight, that world had gathered to witness a choice. The grand ballroom stretched endlessly beneath vaulted ceilings painted with centuries of royal triumphs. Gold chandeliers hung like constellations above a sea of silk and jewels. Music drifted softly through the air, violins measured and elegant, masking the sharper sounds beneath it. Judgment. Comparison. Selection. Dozens of noble women filled the hall, their laughter light but calculated, their movements precise, each one aware she was being watched. Because at the far end of the room, upon a raised marble platform, sat the man they had all come for. The Alpha King. He did not move. He did not smile. He barely even looked at them. Yet his presence dominated the entire hall. Power radiated from him, not loud, not theatrical, but absolute. The kind of power that didn't need to prove itself. It simply existed. And everyone else adjusted around it. His dark attire bore no unnecessary ornament, yet every detail spoke of control, precision, authority. His expression was unreadable. Cold. Detached. Uninterested. One by one, noble families presented their daughters. Each woman stepped forward with rehearsed grace. They curtsied. Spoke carefully chosen words. Displayed strength, lineage, elegance. Everything a queen was expected to be. Everything he should want. And one by one, he dismissed them. A slight tilt of his head. A single word. Next. No hesitation. No explanation. No interest. Whispers began to ripple through the court. He's rejected 12 already? 13. Does he intend to choose no one? The tension grew thicker with each passing moment, because this was not normal. The Alpha King was expected to choose, to secure alliances, to strengthen the throne, but instead, he remained still, unmoved, as if searching for something no one else could see, because somewhere in his mind, a memory refused to fade, not clear, not complete, but persistent, a scent, soft, familiar, impossible to forget, a moment buried in darkness, a night he could not fully recall, yet could not escape. It came to him in fragments, warm skin beneath his hands, a presence that stirred something dangerously close to recognition, and a connection, raw, immediate, unexplainable. But when he searched for the face, there was nothing, only absence, only questions, and a frustration that had lingered ever since. Who was she? Why did she feel known? Why had she disappeared? The memory flickered again, then vanished. The king's jaw tightened slightly, and for the first time that evening, his attention shifted, because something in the room had changed. Near the entrance, Elara stood alone. She had never felt so visible, or so small. The moment she entered the ballroom, the air had shifted. Not subtly, not quietly, openly, cruelly. The whispers began almost instantly. That's her. She actually came? Shameless. Eyes followed her every step. Not curious, not neutral, judging, condemning. Elara kept her head lowered as she moved along the edge of the room, trying to disappear into the shadows of towering marble columns. But there was no hiding. Not here. Not tonight. Because someone stepped directly into her path. Tall, elegant, perfectly poised. A noble woman with a smile that carried no warmth. Well, the woman said softly, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, this is unexpected. More women gathered, like vultures sensing something already broken. I thought they would have hidden you, another added. Soft laughter. Elara's fingers tightened slightly around the fabric of her dress. She said nothing. Tell me, the first woman continued, her gaze dropping deliberately to Elara's abdomen, is it true? Pause. A deliberate one. Then, you're carrying a child? The surrounding group leaned in, waiting, watching, hoping. Elara swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes. Silence. Then, laughter. Sure. Unfiltered. How embarrassing. And she came here anyway? Does she think this is a charity gathering? More laughter. Each word landed like a blow. She doesn't even know who the father is, someone whispered. Another voice louder. Or maybe she does, and he didn't want her. The cruelty escalated quickly, because in a room built on perfection, imperfection became entertainment. Elara's chest tightened, her breath shallow, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Not again. Then, the room shifted, subtly, but unmistakably. The laughter faltered, voices softened, because someone else had begun watching. From across the ballroom, the Alpha King's gaze had locked onto her. At first, it was simply curiosity, a disruption, something out of place in a room designed for perfection. But then, something deeper, something instinctive. His expression didn't change, but inside, something stirred. Because as he watched her standing there, surrounded, cornered, humiliated, he felt it, faint, but unmistakable. That scent, the same one from his memory, the same one that had haunted him. His eyes narrowed slightly. Impossible. And yet, the king rose slowly from his seat. The movement was subtle, but it silenced the room instantly, because when he moved, everything else stopped. His steps were measured as he descended from the platform. Not rushed, not hesitant, deliberate, controlled. And every step brought him closer to her. Elara didn't notice at first. She was still trapped in the circle of noble women, still absorbing their words, until the laughter stopped, completely. A heavy silence fell. The women around her stiffened, their expressions shifting instantly, from mockery to fear. Elara frowned slightly, confused. Then she felt it, that presence, strong, overwhelming. Behind her, she turned slowly, and found herself face to face with the Alpha King. Her breath caught. The entire room seemed to disappear. His eyes locked onto hers, sharp, piercing, searching. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, he stepped closer, close enough that only she could hear his voice. Oh, controlled. Who is the father? The question hit her like a shock. Ilara's lips parted slightly. I don't know. A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Recognition? No. Something more complicated. He studied her face, her scent, her presence, and the truth settled heavily inside him. It was her. Or at least, it was connected to her. The memory, the night, the missing piece, and suddenly, everything aligned. His decision came instantly. Not emotional, not hesitant, strategic, but not entirely, because beneath the logic, there was something else. Something he did not fully understand. His voice dropped again. Pretend the child is mine. Ilara froze. The words didn't make sense. What? In return, he continued calmly, I will give you protection. The room remained silent around them. But in that small space between them, everything changed. Ilara's heart pounded. Fear surged first. Because nothing about this felt safe. Nothing about him felt gentle. He was power. Absolute power. But beneath the fear, something else rose. Desperation. Because she knew what happened if she refused. She had nowhere to go. No one to protect her. No future waiting beyond rejection. Her father's words echoed in her mind. If no one chooses you, you will not return. Her fingers trembled slightly. You would claim me? She whispered. His gaze didn't waver. Yes. The simplicity of it made it more terrifying. No emotion. No softness. Just certainty. Ilara swallowed. This wasn't salvation. It was a bargain. A dangerous one. But it was also a chance. A way to survive. A way to protect the life growing inside her. Her hand moved again to her abdomen. Instinctively. Quietly. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. Then, she nodded. Yes. The word barely left her lips. But it changed everything. The king turned. And without hesitation, he raised his voice. Clear. Commanding. Carrying across the entire ballroom. I have made my choice. The room froze. Every noble. Every servant. Every whisper silenced instantly. The king extended his hand. Toward Ilara. This woman, he said, his voice steady, unshakable, will stand beside me. Gasps exploded through the hall. Disbelief. Confusion. The noble women who had mocked her moments ago stepped back instinctively. As if proximity alone had become dangerous. Ilara stood frozen. Her heart racing. Her mind struggling to catch up. But when his hand remained extended, she took it, slowly, carefully, as if stepping into something irreversible. The king turned back to the court. She is mine. The words landed like thunder. Final. Absolute. And just like that, everything changed. The whispers returned. But now they were different. How is this possible? He chose her? The ruined Omega? No one laughed anymore. Because no one dared. Not now. Not after that declaration. Ilara stood beside him. Still trembling. Still uncertain. But no longer alone. The weight of the room had shifted entirely. Fear replaced mockery. Silence replaced cruelty. Because in a single moment, the woman no one wanted had become untouchable. And yet, as Ilara stood beside the most powerful man in the kingdom, a new fear began to grow inside her. Because protection always came with a price. And she had no idea what it would cost her. The palace did not celebrate her. It accepted her. Reluctantly. Coldly. Like a storm that had no choice but to pass through. The morning after the selection, the castle felt different. Not quieter. Not calmer. Just sharper. Servants moved with careful precision, their eyes lowered whenever Ilara passed, their expressions carefully blank. The nobles were less subtle. They didn't whisper anymore. They didn't need to. Their judgment lived openly in their stares. In the way conversations paused when she entered a room. In the deliberate distance they placed between themselves and her, as if proximity alone might stain them. Ilara walked through the grand corridor slowly, her fingers brushing against the fabric of her new gown. It was finer than anything she had ever worn. Soft, elegant, perfectly fitted. And yet, it felt like a disguise. Like something that didn't belong to her. Because nothing here did. Not the towering marble walls. Not the golden chandeliers. Not the guards who bowed when she passed. Not the title they had silently placed on her shoulders. She was not one of them. And they would never let her forget it. A group of noble women stood ahead near the archway. They didn't move when she approached. They didn't step aside. They simply watched. One of them tilted her head slightly. How fortunate, she said, her tone smooth but edged with something sharp. Some people fail upward in the most extraordinary ways. A few quiet laughs followed. Alara kept walking. She didn't respond. Didn't look at them. Because she had already learned something important about this place. Their cruelty fed on reaction. And she refused to give them that. It hurt. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But in that quiet, steady way that settled deep in her chest and refused to leave. The king watched all of it. Not always openly. Not always directly. But he noticed. Every glance. Every shift in tone. Every subtle act of exclusion. He said nothing. At first. Because this arrangement, this agreement, had never been about comfort. It had been about strategy. Protection. Control. But something about the way she moved through the palace. Quiet. Contained. Enduring. Began to unsettle him. Because she did not behave like someone who had gained power. She behaved like someone who expected to lose it at any moment. Their first real conversation happened 3 nights later. Not in the grand halls. Not in front of watching eyes. But in the quiet stillness of the palace garden. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blooming night flowers. Lanterns lined the stone paths, casting soft golden light across the hedges. Alara stood near the fountain, her hands resting lightly against the cool stone edge. She hadn't expected him to come. But she felt him before she heard him. That presence. Steady. Unavoidable. You avoid the main halls. His voice came from behind her. Oh, even. Alara didn't turn immediately. I prefer quiet places, she said softly. Pause. Then footsteps. Measured. He stopped beside her. Close. But not too close. For someone who wanted protection, he said, you make little use of it. Alara glanced at him then. There was no mockery in his expression. No accusation. Just observation. I didn't ask for attention, she replied. Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. Because that wasn't defiance. It was truth. Simple. Unfiltered. The king leaned slightly against the stone, his gaze drifting toward the water. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. Just unfamiliar. Then, does it frighten you? Alara blinked. What? This place, he clarified. This role. She hesitated. Because the honest answer was dangerous. But something about the quiet. About the way he wasn't looking directly at her. Made it easier. Yes. The word was soft. Barely there. But real. The king exhaled slowly. Not surprised. Good, he said after a moment. Alara frowned slightly. That means you understand it. She studied him then. Trying to understand what lived beneath that controlled exterior. Does it frighten you? She asked quietly. That made him pause. A longer pause. His jaw tightened slightly. But he didn't answer directly. Instead his gaze shifted. Distant. As if something far away had caught his attention. Or perhaps, a memory. There are things, he said slowly, that should not remain unknown. Alara's chest tightened. Because she knew, somehow, that he wasn't talking about the throne. Or the court. He was talking about something else. Something personal. Something unresolved. The memory came again that night. Stronger. Clear. The king stood alone in his chamber, staring out at the dark horizon. And suddenly, he wasn't there anymore. He was back in that moment. That fragmented, haunting memory that refused to release him. A dimly lit room. The scent. That same scent. Soft. Warm. Familiar. A presence beneath him. Breathing unevenly. A voice, faint, barely audible. Stop. His eyes snapped open. The memory shattered. His breath came slightly heavier. Frustration surged again. Because every time he got closer, every time it almost became clear, it slipped away. But one thing remained constant. The scent. And now, he knew that scent. He had felt it again. Recently. Close. Too close. His mind returned to her. Alara. Standing in the ballroom. Surrounded. Vulnerable. And carrying that same unmistakable trace. Impossible. And yet, days turned into nights. And slowly, something began to change. Not in the court. Not in the way others saw her. But between them. It happened in small moments. Unnoticed. Unspoken. A cup of tea left waiting for her before she arrived. A servant dismissed before they could speak out of turn. A subtle shift in the king's posture whenever someone addressed her disrespectfully. Protectiveness. At first it was strategic. Expected. Part of the agreement. But then, it became something else. One evening during a formal dinner, a nobleman let his words linger too long. "Your Majesty," he said smoothly, his gaze flicking toward Alara, "one must admire your generosity." The implication was clear. The insult sharper. The room tensed. Waiting. Watching. The king didn't raise his voice. Didn't slam his hand. He simply turned his head slightly. And looked at the man. Just once. The nobleman paled instantly. Because that look carried something far more dangerous than anger. Finality. "You may leave," the king said quietly. The man didn't argue. Didn't hesitate. He stood and left immediately. And no one else spoke out of turn that night. Alara noticed. Of course she noticed. But she didn't comment. Didn't thank him. Because she didn't know how to define what was happening. And that uncertainty terrified her. Because the closer he became, the more dangerous the truth felt. Every quiet conversation. Every shared silence. Every moment where his guard slipped just enough for her to see something real beneath it, made her chest tighten. Because she knew something he didn't. Something that could destroy everything. The night. The memory he chased. The woman he couldn't find. The truth he was slowly circling. It was her. It had always been her. And if he ever realized that, everything would change. Not just the agreement. Not just their fragile connection. Everything. Would he feel betrayed? Would he believe her? Would he think she had hidden it intentionally? Used it? Manipulated him? The questions built quietly inside her, growing heavier with each passing day. Because the longer she stayed silent, the more it began to feel like a lie. And then, there were the moments that almost broke everything. A glance that lingered too long. A conversation that went one step deeper than it should have. A question left unanswered. One night, in the same garden where they had first spoken, the distance between them felt thinner, more fragile. "You're different from what I expected," the king said quietly. Alara looked at him. "So are you." That earned the faintest hint of a reaction. Not quite a smile, but something close. His gaze softened. Just slightly. "Tell me something true," he said. The request caught her off guard. "About what?" "Anything." The silence stretched. Because there were too many truths. And none of them felt safe. Finally. "I didn't choose this," she said. His expression didn't change. But something in his eyes did. "Neither did I," he replied. And for a moment, they stood there. Not as king and chosen. Not as power and obligation. But as two people caught in something neither of them had planned. Something neither of them fully understood. Something dangerously close to real. He stepped closer. Just slightly. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Close enough that the air shifted. His gaze dropped briefly. To her lips. Then back to her eyes. And for one suspended moment, felt like everything might change. Like the distance between them might finally disappear. Until, "Your Majesty." The interruption shattered it instantly. A guard stood at the edge of the garden, head bowed. The moment broke. The distance returned. The king stepped back. Composed again. Controlled. "Later," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked away. Alara remained where she stood. Her heart racing. Because that moment had been real. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. From the shadows above, unseen by both of them, a figure watched. Silent. Observing. Because in this palace, nothing remained hidden forever. The king returned to his chambers that night with something unfamiliar sitting heavily in his chest. Not strategy. Not duty. Something deeper. Something he had not allowed himself to feel in a long time. He was beginning to care. Not because of the arrangement. Not because of the child. But because of her. Her quiet strength. Her honesty. Her presence. It had slipped past his defenses without permission. And now, it refused to leave. But even as that realization settled in, so did another. Because the questions had not gone away. The memory had not faded. The truth still waited. Somewhere. Close. Closer than he realized. And as he stood there, staring into the dark, he didn't yet understand the most important thing of all. He was searching for someone he had already found. He was chasing a truth standing right in front of him. And he was falling. For the very woman who held it. Without realizing, she was the answer to everything he couldn't remember. The palace had been holding its breath. Now, it exhaled. And everything began to fracture. At first, the tension moved quietly. Like a crack beneath polished marble. Invisible. But spreading. Because power never sits still for long. And Alara had disrupted it. Lady Varel had been watching for weeks. Patient. Calculating. Her smile always perfect. her voice always sweet. But behind it, ambition sharpened into something far more dangerous. She had been among the noblewomen that night. She had seen it. The moment the king chose Alara. Not admired her. Not considered her. Chosen her. And ever since, Varel had been waiting for the flaw. Because there was always a flaw. And Alara was nothing but one. She doesn't belong here, Varel murmured softly one evening, her voice drifting through a private gathering of nobles. The room was dim, filled with candlelight and quiet conspiracies. She was chosen out of impulse, another noble added. The king will correct his mistake. Varel smiled faintly. No, she said. He won't. Pause. Not unless we give him a reason to. The others leaned closer. Curiosity. Interest. Danger. Varel's gaze darkened slightly. She carries a secret, she said. And secrets can be exposed. The pressure built quickly after that. Subtle at first. Questions raised in council meetings. Whispers about legitimacy. Concerns about the unborn child. Can a woman of unknown standing truly carry the future of the throne? Shouldn't the king reconsider? Each word planted carefully. Each doubt nurtured. Until the court began to shift. Not openly against her. Not yet. But enough. Enough to make Alara feel it. The distance growing. The stares sharpening. The danger rising. The night it happened. The palace was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't soothe. It warns. Alara had been escorted back to her chambers early. The corridors dim. The guards, fewer than usual. She noticed it. Of course she noticed it. But she said nothing. Because she had learned something else in this palace. Not every danger announces itself. Some wait. Patiently. Until it's too late. She stepped into her chamber. The door closed behind her. And for a moment, everything was still. Then, a sound, soft, behind her. She turned. Too late. A cloth pressed against her mouth. A sharp scent filled her lungs. Her body reacted instantly. Panic. Struggle. But her strength was already fading. No. The word barely formed before darkness swallowed her whole. When the king heard, the palace shook. Not physically, but something deeper. Something far more dangerous. Because the moment the words reached him, she's gone. Everything changed. The room went still. Dead still. Explain. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. The guard swallowed. She was escorted to her chambers, Your Majesty, but she was taken, the king finished. The temperature in the room dropped. By whom? We don't know. Silence. Then, the king moved. Fast. Violent. The chair beside him shattered against the wall as he rose. Rage tore through him like wildfire. Uncontrolled. Unfiltered. Because this was not strategy. Not politics. This was something else. Something personal. Find her, he said. The words weren't loud. But they carried something far worse than shouting. A promise. Search every corridor. Every passage. Every border. His eyes darkened. And if anyone stands in your way, pause. Remove them. The command spread instantly. The palace erupted into motion. Guards flooded the halls. Messengers rode into the night. The king himself didn't wait. Didn't delegate. He hunted. Hours passed. Then more. No trace. No sign. Until a voice broke through the chaos. My king. It was Eric. His most trusted ally. The one man who spoke truth when others feared to. I found something. The king turned sharply. Eric stepped forward, his expression tight. There's more to this, he said. The king's eyes narrowed. Speak. Eric hesitated only a fraction. Then, the night you've been searching for. Silence. The air shifted. You said you remembered a scent, Eric continued. A presence. A connection. The king's jaw tightened. Yes. Eric met his gaze. The timeline matches. Pause. Long. Heavy. What are you implying? The king asked slowly. Eric exhaled. That the woman you've been searching for. His voice dropped. May not be missing. Something inside the king stilled. Dangerously. Eric continued. The scent you described. Another pause. I've smelled it before. The king's pulse slowed. Controlled. Deadly. Where? Eric didn't look away. On her. Silence. Absolute. The world seemed to tilt. The king's mind moved fast now. Too fast. Fragments connecting. Moments aligning. The ballroom. The recognition. The pull he couldn't explain. The way she felt, familiar? No, he said quietly. But the doubt had already taken root. Eric stepped closer. There's more, he said. The night she disappeared from her home. The king's eyes snapped to his. It aligns with the same night you. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Because the truth was already forming. Piece by piece. Relentless. Unavoidable. The king staggered back slightly. Not physically, but internally. Because if this was true, if the memory, if the woman, if Alara, his chest tightened. Something sharp, unforgiving, guilt, fear, realization. If the truth is what I think it is, he murmured. His voice dropped. Then I left her. The words barely existed, but they shattered something inside him. Because if she was the one, if she had been there that night, then everything she endured, everything she suffered, had begun with him. And now, she was gone. The search intensified. Faster. More brutal. No hesitation. No mercy. Because this was no longer about protection. This was about something far more dangerous. Something he had already lost once. Without even knowing it. And somewhere, far beyond the palace walls, Alara lay unconscious. Her body weak. Her breath uneven. Her hand resting protectively over her abdomen. Time slipping. Danger closing in. Back in the palace, the king stood at the center of the storm he had created. And for the first time, fear truly set in. Not of losing power. Not of losing control. But of losing her. Before he even understood what she meant to him. Before he even had the chance to choose differently. His fists clenched. If the truth is what I fear. His voice broke slightly. Then I've already lost her. And this time, there would be no silence to hide behind. The night did not wait for permission. It broke. Violently. Relentlessly. Like something long restrained finally snapping free. Steel rang against steel in sharp, brutal bursts as the king's forces tore through the abandoned outpost. Torches flared against the wind, shadows twisting wildly across crumbling stone walls. Men shouted. Orders were given. But at the center of it all, there was only one presence that mattered. The king did not move like a ruler. He moved like a man chasing something already slipping through his hands. Every door was forced open. Every corridor cleared. Every second stretched too long. Because somewhere inside this place, she was waiting. Or worse, she wasn't. Then, a voice. Here. Everything stopped. For half a heartbeat. Then the king moved. Fast. Unstoppable. He reached the final door and didn't hesitate. It shattered under the force of his strike. And there, on the cold stone floor, he saw her. Alara. Small. Still. Too still. Her body curled slightly, one hand resting protectively over her abdomen. Her breath shallow. Uneven. Alara. The name left him like something breaking. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering for a moment. Afraid. Afraid to touch her. Afraid of what he might feel. Or worse, what he might not. Then his fingers reached her face. Warm. Still warm. Relief hit him so hard it almost staggered him. Alara, open your eyes. For a moment, nothing. Then, a flicker. Her lashes trembled. Her eyes opened just slightly. Unfocused. Searching. And when they found him, something softened. You came, she whispered. The words were fragile. Barely there. But they shattered him completely. Because even now, even after everything, she had believed he would. His hand tightened gently against her cheek. I'm here. Not a promise. Not a vow. The truth. And then, it happened. The moment everything aligned. The scent. Stronger now. Unmistakable. It wrapped around him, pulling something loose in his memory. Something buried. Something denied. His breath caught. The world around him faded. And suddenly, he wasn't here. He was there. That night. That fractured, haunting night. The dim light. The soft resistance. The voice. Her voice. Barely strong enough to form the word. Stop. His eyes snapped open. Back to her. Back to now. Back to truth. His chest tightened violently. It was you, he breathed. The realization hit like a storm breaking through a dam. His voice cracked. Raw. Uncontrolled. It was you, it was always you. Alara's brows furrowed slightly. Confusion. Pain. But something else too. Understanding. I didn't remember, she whispered weakly. Not clearly. Her fingers moved slightly, searching. He caught her hand instantly. Held it like something fragile. Something irreplaceable. I should have found you, he said, his voice breaking under the weight of it. I should have known. Guilt flooded every word. Because every moment of her suffering, every whisper, every look, every ounce of shame she carried, had begun with him. And he hadn't even seen it. I thought I was alone, she said softly. The words cut deeper than anything else. Because she had been. Completely. Utterly. Alone. And now. He understood why. His grip tightened. You're not, he said. Fierce. Certain. Not anymore. Then. Pain tore through her. Sharp. Sudden. Unforgiving. Ilara gasped, her body tensing beneath his hands. The baby. Her voice broke. And everything changed again. The world narrowed. Focus sharpened. Urgency took over. Stay with me, he said quickly, his voice steady despite the rising panic. Look at me. Her breath came faster now. Uneven. Pain crashing through her in waves. I can't. Yes, you can, he cut in firmer now. You're stronger than this. His hand never left hers. Not once. Not even when the next wave hit harder. Not even when her grip tightened painfully. Not even when fear crept into his own chest. Because this was not something he could command. Not something he could control. All he could do was stay. And so he did. Time blurred. Moments stretched. Collapsed. Reformed. Pain. Breath. Fear. Hope. All colliding into something overwhelming. Ilara, stay with me. I'm trying. You are. You are. Her strength faltered. Then surged again. Her body trembling under the strain. And through it all, he stayed. Not as a king. Not as power. But as the one person she needed. The one who had failed her once. And refused to fail her again. You're not alone, he repeated. Again. 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 Until the words stopped being reassurance. And became truth. Then, a cry. Sharp. Clear. Alive. Everything stopped. The sound cut through the chaos like light breaking through darkness. The king froze. His breath caught. His entire world narrowing to that single fragile sound. Life. No. Unbroken. He looked down. Then back at her. Ilara lay still, exhausted, her breathing shallow but steady. Her eyes fluttered open slightly. And when she saw his expression, something soft touched her lips. A faint smile. This is ours, he said quietly. Not a question. Not uncertainty. A truth spoken from something deeper than power. Her fingers tightened weakly around his. Yes. And in that moment, everything collided. The past. The truth. The pain. The love that had begun without permission. The fear of losing it. All of it. Because what had been hidden had finally been revealed. What had been broken had found its way back. But the weight of that truth, the consequences of it, still lingered just beyond the edges of this fragile piece. And as the first light of dawn began to creep through the broken walls, one thing became painfully clear. This was not the end. It was the moment everything truly began. The storm did not end. It quieted. Slowly. Reluctantly. Like a kingdom learning how to breathe again after nearly collapsing under its own weight. Morning arrived not with celebration, but with stillness. A fragile, uncertain calm that settled over the palace like a question waiting to be answered. Because everything had changed. And everyone knew it. The announcement came at midday. Formal. Unavoidable. Final. The court gathered once more beneath towering columns and cold marble floors. The same place where whispers had once torn her apart. Only now, no one whispered. No one dared. The king stood at the center. Unshaken. Unyielding. And beside him, Ilara. Not hidden. Not lowered. Not broken. She stood upright, though her strength had only just begun to return. Her presence quiet, but undeniable. In her arms, the child. Living proof of a truth no one could deny anymore. The court watched. Every noble. Every voice that had once doubted. Every pair of eyes that had judged. Waiting. Holding their breath. The king stepped forward. And when he spoke, his voice carried across the entire hall. This child, he said, his tone steady, absolute, is mine. A ripple moved through the crowd. Recognition. Fear. But he didn't stop. Heir to the throne. The words landed heavier this time. Sealing fate. Ending doubt. And then, his gaze shifted. To her. Ilara, he said, softer now, but no less powerful. My queen. Silence. Total. Because in that moment, everything reversed. One by one, they bowed. The same nobles who had turned away. The same voices that had whispered. The same people who had watched her suffer now lowered themselves before her. Not out of kindness, not out of guilt, but because they had no choice. Power had shifted, and it had shifted completely. Alara didn't move at first, didn't react, because this wasn't victory the way they imagined it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't triumphant. It was quiet, and heavy with everything it had cost her. Her gaze drifted across the room. Faces she remembered, moments she couldn't forget, pain that still lingered, but something else rose with it, something stronger. She wasn't that girl anymore, the one who stood alone, the one who carried shame that was never hers, the one who waited for someone to choose her, because now, she had been chosen, and more importantly, she had survived. Later, when the hall had emptied and the weight of the crown had settled into something real, there was only silence again. But this time, it wasn't cold. It wasn't isolating. It was shared. The king stood behind her, his presence steady, unwavering. Not distant. Not guarded. Present. Completely. "You should rest," he said quietly. No command. No authority. Just concern. She turned slightly, meeting his gaze. And for the first time, there was no fear between them. No distance. Only truth. "I'm not alone anymore," she said softly. The words lingered, because they meant more than comfort. They meant everything. His hand found hers. Held it. Not as possession. Not as power. But as something chosen. Something real. "You never will be again." There was one more moment. Quiet. Unseen. At the edge of the palace steps, a man stood watching from a distance. Her father. His expression unreadable at first. Then, cracked. Regret. Heavy. Late. But real. He didn't approach. Didn't speak. Because some distances cannot be undone with words. But Alara saw him. Just for a moment. And though she said nothing, she didn't look away. Because she didn't need to. The past no longer held power over her. And as the sun set over the kingdom, casting gold across stone and crown alike, a new story settled into place. Not one of power alone. Not one of fate alone. But one of survival. Of truth. Of a woman who had been broken. And became something unshakable. Because in the end, the truth was simple. And impossible to ignore. The Omega no one wanted. Became the queen no one could replace.